Okay, today I'm on my way to interview David Krakauer. And of course, I'm quite late.
Hi, I'm David Krakauer, and this is for Riviera Jazz Club. I've been touring in France since 2000. So I started coming to France, and since then I come between 3 and 6 times a year from the United States. So I'm very familiar with France, and je parle couramment la langue française. So I speak French fluently, and I even studied here in Nice at the International Academy. I love the French audience. J'adore les Français, j'adore de jouer en France. C'est vraiment une très très belle expérience pour moi chaque fois. La chaleur, c'est magnifique. Tonight here in Nice, we're going to do a program with Ancestral Groove. And we're doing mainly my compositions, but also some compositions from John Zorn and some traditional klezmer done in our own way. And klezmer, by the way, is the music of my ancestry. That's why I call the band Ancestral Groove, because it has groove and a modernity, and at the same time it speaks to the culture of my ancestors and my roots. And so we mix it up with some traditional pieces, but mostly my own original compositions and, you know, as I said, music by John Zorn and also by a traditional Moldavian master, Emil Kreutor. And, you know, have incredible musicians with me, long-time collaborators, Cheryl Bailey on the guitar, Jerome Harris on the bass, Michael Serene on the drums, and Keep Alive on the sampler, who's also the co-composer of a couple of the tunes. So, yeah, it's very, very interesting work, and I've been sort of on this big journey to reinvent and you know, do this music of my roots music in my own way for 25 years. That lineage isn't that direct. None of my mother, who died 16 years ago, was a very accomplished violinist, an amazing violinist, and a very, very beloved teacher. So I grew up with classical music in my house, and actually I didn't grow up with klezmer music. You know, it was my ancestors, my grandparents, my great-grandparents came from Eastern Europe to the United States at the end of the 19th century, early 20th century. And when they came, they had suffered religious persecution, they had suffered incredible poverty, and so they decided to pretty much leave all of that behind them and start new in America, speaking only English. They stopped speaking the language that they spoke, which was Yiddish, the language of, you know, Eastern European Jews. But there was still something that remained. My grandmother had a very thick Yiddish accent, and when I was in my early 30s, I became curious about my heritage, about my roots, about my ancestry. And I started playing this music, at first in a very traditional way, and playing for weddings, even though that tradition was lost in America, but then people wanted it again. They had heard it as kids. Some of the older people had heard it as kids and decided they wanted it at weddings again. And so I was doing it in a very traditional way, but then I joined a band called the Klezmatics. We started playing kind of like a Jewish rock band, a Jewish punk band, very loud and boisterous and very in your face. You know, and then in the mid-90s, I left the Klezmatics, formed my own band, and started doing all kinds of different things, adding guitar, adding electric guitar, adding samples, adding different sounds of rock and funk and jazz. And then in the early 2000s, I met a young man named So-Called, who's a Canadian musician and producer, and he brought in the whole element of hip-hop into my band. And while I had worked with sampler players before, this was kind of a new adventure for me. And then So-Called and I formed a band called Abraham Incorporated together with the great master of funk, Fred Wesley. So we're bringing together ancestral music traditions from African American traditions and Jewish traditions together. And we'll be back in November of 2017. There's a tour planned of Europe again. So Abraham Incorporated will rise again and do some great work. In the meanwhile, I think that Ancestral Groove, the band I'm currently touring with, and it's my working band, I will tour always with this band, it kind of brings together a lot of the different phases of my career, as I said, from traditional Jewish klezmer to funk and jazz, and bringing all of those elements together in an organic way. Yeah, I mean, I'm working on a theatrical project now that hopefully will come out in a year and a half or something like that. I also have a really beautiful project I do with a pianist, a duo project which we call Breath and Hammer. The pianist is wonderful South African virtuoso Kathleen Tagg, and she has been making these arrangements, sort of orchestral arrangements that we record, but all the parts are from the piano, plucking the piano, bowing the piano with cello bows, but it makes this huge orchestral texture, and then we've recorded choirs of bass clarinets. So all these samples, together with the live clarinet and piano, make this wild kind of augmented texture, and we'll be touring and coming out with an album with that project as well. So, you know, and I'm also playing as a soloist with symphony orchestra. In March of 2017, I'll be a soloist with the Orchestre L'Amoureux in Paris. And I'm working with orchestras in the United States and in Europe all the time. So this is also a very exciting aspect of my career, plus collaborations with string quartets. I had a long collaboration with the Quatuor Debussy here in France, but also I work with a young quartet from Israel called the Ariel Quartet. And then some of the great quartets playing classical music, the Orion Quartet, the Emerson String Quartet, the Tokyo, and the Kronos quartets. So all these great quartets, so these are various aspects of my activities. Well, you know, Woody Allen and I never really met. I know the bass player in his band, the great bass player Greg Cohen, and one day we went together to see Woody Allen, but he's very reclusive. He and I never spoke. I think we would have a lot to speak about if he were open to it. I gave him one of my records, I signed it, I wrote a note for him thanking him for his love of music, and I didn't hear from him. So, you know, Woody Allen, I mean, he would never say he was a professional clarinetist. He's an amateur clarinetist. But what's very impressive about Woody Allen is, A, his musical culture is extraordinary, and the music he's picked for his films is great. That's another project I do, film music, and we do 3 pieces from Woody Allen movies, Si tu vois ma mère by Sidney Bechet from Midnight in Paris, and also the jazz standard Body and Soul that comes from radio, that's used in Radio Days. And then as well, the march from The Love of Three Oranges by Prokofiev that's used in the film Love and Death. So I do a little homage to Woody Allen. So he has this incredible musical culture and can pick the exact right piece of music to bring out the emotion and the feeling in his films, but also when he plays, this his beloved New Orleans jazz, he knows about 800 tunes apparently by memory, and he'll never call the same tune twice. So he goes on tour and plays this music, and he just always plays different stuff, which is really, really, I would say, extremely impressive. He must have a photographic memory. So this is the mind and memory of a great filmmaker. So I have nothing but great respect for Woody Allen, but unfortunately, we never met. I would love to meet him one day. His films changed my life when I was a young kid. And, talking about the quintessential Jewish culture, Woody Allen is one of the great masters of Jewish humor. Yes, there are things that sound very much like traditional Ukrainian or Russian or Polish music, but the difference is that the klezmer music, Jewish, this kind of Eastern European Jewish music, is very influenced by this singing in the synagogue. And so you hear the cantorial inflection in the music, and that's what makes it really different. That's what sets it apart from the various other Eastern European folk musics. For me, I hear a kind of indirect connection between the Yiddish language and klezmer music. When I first heard klezmer music, I had to study it. I had to learn the style. I listened to old recordings from the 1920s to listen and study the style exactly, all the rules and regulations. But so that was difficult or whatever, that took work. But on the other hand, I said, wow, this is really familiar. This sounds like my grandmother speaking. So it had that feeling to it. So yeah, I'm probably someone, a linguistics professor and a professor of musicology could get together and figure out something tangibly, but just for me, that's my instinctive reaction.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
They were goddamn right! Radioactive crap floating in from Japan! There's an island of garbage in the middle of the